Good afternoon, participants. I'm Yogendra Singh, editor of ET, and I welcome you all in this webinar on the dynamics of new to credit consumers. From the time a consumer first enters the credit life cycle and is assigned his or her first credit score, the opportunity arises to better understand credit needs and behaviors that follow that journey. While credit scores are the traditional ingredients to a basic underwriting practice, there's more to analyze and assess for a new to credit consumer. As younger consumers enter the life cycle, it's important to understand how lenders can identify risk-eligible consumers with thinner files and lower risk scores. Such information will help enable lenders to enhance underwriting practices and create organic growth opportunities tailored to consumers with new and growing credit needs. Participants, in today's webinar, we'll find out how many Indian consumers enter the credit life cycle over time, review product participation and performance for these consumers, and gain insights on how to identify new to credit consumers who would be reasonable targets for acquisition campaigns. And to throw light on all these aspects, we have with us today Mr. Yogendra Singh, Vice President, Financial Services Research and Consulting, TransUnion CIBIL. Yogendra leads financial services research and consulting in India and is currently charged with analyzing industry developments from a macro and micro perspective to identify trends and issues that may impact the aggregate lending marketplace. He's also responsible for building and reinforcing market perception of TransUnion as an expert in the lending industry. Previously, Singh worked in different capacities such as economist, strategist, and fund manager with CRISIL, First Gulf Bank, CIBIL Bank, and First Global in both India and abroad. He holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from Bhavnagar University and a master's in management from KJ Somaiya Institute of Management. He has also completed international quantitative and risk analytics certifications, including CQF, FRM, CRM, and CAIA. So without any more delay, I would like to hand over to Mr. Yogendra to begin his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Yogendra.
Thanks a lot, Yashwendra. So, before we move into the detail of the presentation, what I would like to do is to review the 4 core themes that we'll address during the course of this presentation. So, we'll first, talk about the importance of new to credit customers, so as to build a background to the entire story that we'll see today. Then we'll discuss the conventional market wisdom around new to credit customers, and we'll analyze the typical couple of years of a consumer's credit journey to understand as to how accurate this conventional wisdom is vis-a-vis what we actually observe in the data. Finally, once we have gone through and understood consumer behavior, especially new to credit consumer behavior, we'll talk about briefly about the implications for lenders to consider around these NTC customers. So when I say NTC, just please mean that it's new to credit. Before we move on, let's first have a proper definition of what an NTC customer is. New to credit or an NTC customer, as per our definition, is a customer who gets his first ever reported trade line in the bureau. So any person who has never ever taken a loan would probably not have a record in the bureau. As and when you either take a loan, like let's say you have purchased a two-wheeler or a car on loan, or you have bought a house, or you have taken a credit card, any of the standard retail lending products, and once you get a bureau record, you become a new to credit customer. The moment you open a second or more trade, you will actually be considered to be part of credit established, and you will not be a new to credit. So for all consumers would become NTC only for a brief period of time. Once they have gone through that process, they are considered to be established. And over here today we'll just be discussing the behavior of these consumers when they open up their first trade and what happens in the couple of years following that. Now, why should we care about NTC customers? I mean, that's a question that would be there in the minds of most market participants. I mean, is this something that is even worth discussing also or not? And we'll lay out some broad numbers that will give you an idea about the relative importance of this segment. So first thing, In 2017, we had close to 23 million customers who are actually NTC. That number increased moderately from, let's say, 20.1 million in 2016 or 22 million in 2015. Over the course of 5 odd years, we have seen a significant jump in that NTC population. Another way to look at that is, out of the 23 million people who actually entered the credit market for the first time in 2017, roughly 60% of them came in through the retail lending route. Now, over here, I'll just give you briefly the difference between retail lending and other products. When we talk about retail lending, what we mean are the 9 standard retail lending products like auto loans, used car loans, home loan, loan against property, personal loans, consumer durable loan, education loan, credit card, and two-wheeler loans. The TransUnion CIBIL Consumer Bureau actually has records on a whole lot of other products, and these would typically be agriculture lending, Kisan credit cards, or loans against bank deposits, and so on and so forth. Those are all clubbed under the other products. So if you look at it, from 2012 to 2017, there has been a decent shift in terms of the composition of the new to credit customers. In 2012, we had roughly around 63% of all consumers coming through other products, with 37% coming through retail financing. Today, that number has more or less reversed, with close to 60% of all consumers coming in through the retail financing route and roughly 40% coming in through the other products. What it indicates are, let's say, a couple of things. One, retail lending has become probably the biggest driver of NTC customer addition, and by that definition, even one of the bigger drivers of financial inclusion within the country. It is standard retail products like two-wheeler loans and consumer durable loans, which are bringing people within the ambit of formal lending. Secondly, even the numbers, when you're talking about 22, 23 million people, and considering that as of date, at any point of time, the retail lending universe has just about 75, 80 million people who have a loan outstanding. It demonstrates to you the importance of new to credit customers. Another way to look at the importance of new to credit customers would be to look at their share in the overall loans that are being given out, as well as in their share of the total number of consumers who are there. So in this graph, the way to look at this graph is the blue bar actually gives you the share of new to credit consumers in the total loans which are given out during that time period. So for example, let's say if there were 100 rupee loan given out in 2017, 24 rupee actually went out to new to credit customers. If there were 100 customers who actually got a loan, 35 of them were actually new to credit. Now, if you see, the numbers have definitely declined over the space of 2012 to 2017. But I don't think it would be appropriate to extrapolate that the importance of NTC segment has declined. Even now, NTC actually is a fairly big proportion of the market. And secondly, as more and more people actually come into the formal lending space and they become, let's say, the second trade and onwards, they are more established and not NTC, it is but natural and a mathematical progression that the share of NTC will come down, but in absolute terms, NTC continues to be a big proportion and it continues to keep growing. Now, the third way in which we can look at the importance of NTC customers is by looking at what is the share of NTC customers across the various age ranges. As you would expect, for all people, so let's say if there were 100 people in the age 20 to 29 who got a loan in the year of 2017, roughly 50% or 1 out of 2 such people actually were new to credit in nature. If you look at the other age ranges also, you are still talking about ratios as high as 26 to 30%. So all in all, what it says is NTC is actually quite important from amount perspective, from a consumer perspective, and it is important across the age spectrum. Now, considering the growth that the industry has seen so far, there has been legitimate concerns regarding how much of NTC white space is actually left. Now, in the previous webinar that we had done, we had showed you estimates of the addressable population in India, and these number of untapped customers is simply a function of those estimates. So what you have done is you have taken an addressable population as of a particular date, and then we have looked at who are the people who are already part of the formal lending space at that particular point of time. The difference between the addressable population and the people who are part of the formal lending system is the untapped population. So one thing which stands out is, despite the fact that uh, NTC customers have grown at a very rapid rate, and they grew from, let's say, somewhere around 14 million numbers in 2012 to somewhere around, let's say, 23 million in 2017. Despite that, the number of untapped customers has kept on increasing. What it shows is the addressable market in India is still expanding at a very rapid rate, and it is expanding faster than the industry is adding the NTC borrowers. So there's definitely a lot of white space left in the industry when it comes to the NTC population addition as well. So to summarize this section, NTC is definitely a very important aspect of the entire overall industry. It constitutes a significant proportion across various metrics like amount, number of customers, or customers across various age ranges. And going forward also over the next 5 to 10 years, India's NTC segment should continue to be a decent driver of growth simply because our penetration of formal lending is much lower than what you observe in credit developed markets like, let's say, the US or the UK or even Singapore. Now that we know the importance of the NTC customers, now let's take some time to discuss what's the conventional wisdom surrounding the NTC behavior, and we'll try to parse the myth from reality during this section. So there are quite a few, let's say, challenges, that lenders think are surrounding the NTC, and what are those? So the first is NTC customers are generally younger, and by inference could actually be construed as somewhat less responsible than the other older age groups. The second hypothesis that people generally have is the first score of a NTC customer is generally a subprime score, and it indicates a pretty high level of riskiness. The third score is, even if you have a good score from an NTC, you really can't trust the score because the scores are pretty volatile in nature. And because of the volatility, they will keep changing, and your decisions are then not as fixed, or as your ability to trust the score is probably not as high as what it would be for a credit established customer. The fourth is NTC customers generally perform worse than a credit established customers, and even when you control for the score. So the thesis would be, if you don't control for score, they generally perform worse, but even when, let's say, you have an NTC customer and a credit established customer with the same score, they tend to perform worse. Fifth is NTC customers are actually quite different from credit established customers because they have pretty unique credit needs, and those are not what you would be defined as standard credit needs. And sixth is, are NTC customers even loyal also or not, or are they people who are just looking for a trade and then moving on? So these are the 6 hypotheses that we will try to tackle during the course of the next half an hour or so. Let's look at the first thing. New to credit consumers are younger. True. So, the way this graph has been built out is, we have looked at the entire 2017 new trade open for all the 9 retail lending products. And then we took out all in unique individual customers and divided them into age bands of 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, and 60 to 69. These are the same consistent age bands that we'll use all across this presentation. One thing which just stand out is the proportion of NTC customers within the 20 to 29 age band is 39%. So 39% of all NTC customers within the 2017 originations were aged 20 to 29. In contrast, if you look at the established customers, just 21%, or let's say 1 out of 5 established customers who are in that age range. But if you look at, let's say, the other age ranges, one thing that you would notice is the difference between new to credit and established becomes lesser and lesser once we start looking at the other age ranges. Secondly, even though we have 40% or close to 40% coming out of the 20 to 29 age group, you're still talking about 6 out of 10 NTC borrowers actually above the age of 30. And that's a significant statistic. So what it tells you is, yes, NTC customers definitely are comparatively younger, but the distribution is actually still very broadly distributed. And that has important implications for lenders. One has to keep in mind that when we're looking at NTC, we shouldn't just be thinking about young customers, we should actually be thinking about younger customers, but with a lot of people who are age 30 and above actually thrown in the mix. Now let's look at the second hypothesis, which is a consumer's first score is a subprime score. Now, actually, if you think about it, roughly 82% of all people, of all new to credit customers have a score which is prime or better. Now, before I move on, let me just give you a brief definition of what prime, prime plus, and all these score tiers means. So over here, we are using the V1 score. Secondly, so a V1 score of 801 or above actually gets you into the prime plus category. A V1 score of between 751 to 800 gives you the prime category. Anything between 651 to 750 is near prime, and anything below 650 is actually subprime. All of these tiers have very distinct performance characteristics, and you will find that the risk increases as you move on from prime plus to prime to near prime to subprime. So now coming back to the chart, one thing is 82% of all new to credit customers actually have a score which is prime or above. This is in contrast to the 79% of all established customers having a score of prime and above. Of course, the relative distribution of prime plus and prime is different within new to credit and credit established. New to credit generally tend to start off majorly within the prime category, and their proportion of prime plus is fairly limited, while credit established has decently higher proportion of prime plus. But all in all, we are still talking about 4 out of 5 NTC customers actually have a score of prime and above. So it is not as if they're all subprime or they're all high risk. In fact, 4 out of 5 have prime. Moving on to the third. So for hypothesis 3 to 6, we have created a framework because we would need to analyze their behavior over a space of, let's say, 24 to 30 months. So over here, we have the time T. This is the time at which the customer opens a credit product. For time T, we have looked at the duration of January 2015 to June 2015. Then we have time V. This is the time when the NTC customer usually gets the first score. The difference between T and V is usually 6 months. So if somebody opened a trade in January 2015, they should be able to get their first score by July 2015. Then we have looked at, let's say, time T plus 24 months, which is we've looked at the performance of the customer from the date he opened the account to 2 years after he opened the account and seen how does the overall performance look like. We've also looked at the score and the score change from the date he first got the score to 2 years after that. It is important to look at these things in a 24-month horizon simply because if you look at data over 3 to 6 months, you will not be able to get a very clear picture of how performance is. For credit appraisal, it's better to look at a medium-term horizon of somewhere around, let's say, 24 months or so. So for our data purposes, we looked at the account opening between January 2015 to June 2015. We got, let's say, two samples. One was a 4 million new to credit consumer sample and a 5.4 million credit established customers. Credit established in our definition is defined as customers having at least 1 year or more of credit history. Now, when we look at the two samples, what we noticed is there are significant distributional differences in both age and score. Now, if we had taken the samples as is, and if we found out two differences, the standard assumption would be that age or score is actually the reason why the behavior is similar or different. So we wanted to control for age and score, and we wanted to have an analysis in which we could say that age and scores don't matter. Now, what matters is the difference between these two segments, and then we can have a more like-to-like or a apples-to-apple comparison. So what we did was we actually took the two samples and we did a simple random sampling to align the joint risk and age distribution. How do we do that? So for example, let's say take the age 27 years and let's say score of 650 to 700. What you generally do is, and for example, let's say if you find out that for the age 27 years, score range of 650 to 700, you have 100 credit established customers and 80 new to credit. What you do is, through random sampling, you select only 80 out of the 100 for the credit established, so that you have both 80 samples for both credit established and new to customers. So likewise, we divided the entire samples by age ranges, by score ranges, and then we sample down one or the two samples so that they become equal in nature. Post this sampling exercise, we got two equal samples of 3.1 million customers each, taking the total to 6.2 million customers. So now that we have those two samples, let's look at how does the hypothesis 3 actually stack up. Hypothesis 3 was new to credit customers have volatile scores, so you can't really trust the scores that they present. And when you look at the graph, on face of it, it does appear that new to credit actually has more volatility than a credit established. You will see far more jagged edges in the orange graph, which is the new to credit, compared to the blue graph, which is much more smoother and which is therefore the credit established. But when we saw the volatility, we wanted to understand what is the actual direction of the volatility. So when you look at, let's say, direction, there are a couple of ways in which you could measure it. One thing that we did was we looked at the score at, let's say, time V, and then we looked at 24 months post V. And then we try to understand, is the migration positive or negative? By positive, we mean that the score has not dropped by more than 10 points. So if the movement is 10 point, if the movement is minus 10 or more in the positive direction, we are calling it a positive migration. So for example, if the score moved from, let's say, 540 to 560, you are calling it a positive migration. If the score moved from 540 to 520, we call it a negative migration. Couple of things stand out. One, if you look at NTC customers, they have significantly more positive migration than negative migration. In fact, depending on scores, depending on the score range to score range, you're talking about anywhere between a 3:2 to a 2:1 kind of a ratio in favor of positive migration. Secondly, let's look at the prime and the prime plus range. Over here, 3 out of 4 NTC customers actually exhibit a tendency for positive migration, which means their scores actually increase. This is better than the 70% that we see for established customers. In Prime Plus also, we are talking about 59% of all customers actually exhibit a positive migration, better than the 56% that we see for credit established. In the subprime and the near prime segment, we still talk about positive migration outweighing now negative migration for the NTC as well as for the established. But over here, the established actually performs a little better than the NTC. But all in all, with the volatility that we are seeing is actually quite positive in nature, and that to some extent, gives you an idea about that the volatility may actually work in favor of you rather than going against you. Now let's look at the fourth hypothesis, which is NTC customers perform worse than credit established customers even when controlling for scores. At a first glance, it definitely looks as if they do perform worse. But there are a couple of things that you have to look at. One, if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, especially, let's say score ranges between 600 to below 600 to somewhere around, let's say 700 odd. The new to credit has a far higher risk rate or a far higher delinquency rate compared to, let's say, credit established. But the score actually still rank orders pretty well. And the other key factor is the difference actually disappears in the prime ranges. So anytime the score, let's say if you have an NTC and a credit established in the same score, of a score of, let's say 700 or above, you are talking about clear differential. There's no major differential then between a credit established and an NTC customer. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind here is when we looked at the score distribution on the first score, we found out that roughly 80% of all new to credit customers actually start off with a score which is prime or above. Secondly, we observed that they tend to have positive migration. And now the third point, which is the difference between credit established and new to credit actually largely disappears in the prime ranges. So for roughly around 80% of all NTC customers, the difference between them and the credit established customers is pretty limited. It's only the 15 to 20% NTC customers who are actually below prime and who probably may see some, let's say, negative migration. Those are the ones where you might see risks of new to credit being substantially higher than credit established. Now let's look at the fifth hypothesis, which is NTC customers have unique credit needs. Now, for this exercise, what we did was we had the samples for both new to credit and credit established between, let's say, January 2015 to June 2015. We took the two samples, the two aligned samples, and then we looked at what was the second trade, or what were all the trades that were originated for the two samples between the periods of July 2015 to December 2016. So we're looking at an 18-month horizon in which both the samples, what were the products that they actually purchased. And one thing which clearly stands out is the product basket across both new to credit and established is virtually similar. So NTC customers do not actually have any unique need. Their needs are more or less aligned with what you expect for established customers. And over here we are talking about just about a difference of, let's say, 1 to 2 percentage points for 2 or 3 products, but otherwise the distribution across product is remarkably well aligned. We're talking about close to 43% of all accounts actually for both new to credit and established coming for consumer loan. Roughly a quarter of the trades actually coming through credit cards, with slightly less than 1/5 of all trades coming through personal loans. So all in all, we are talking about a very consumption lending heavy product basket for both the credit established as well as the new to credit customers. Now let's look at the sixth hypothesis, which I think is probably the most important hypothesis from a lender perspective, considering So over here, what we have done is we have, let's say, taken the two samples and then we have looked at what is the proportion of second trade that was opened up by these two segments with the same lender. Clearly, for most products, you would find that new to credit consumers tend to have higher loyalty than established customers. And in a way, actually, that makes a lot of, let's say, behavioral sense. People do tend to exhibit loyalty towards people, towards, let's say, institutions or other people who have given them their first chance. There is a certain level of relationship that gets built out, and if lenders are smart enough to take advantage of that, then this is something which is a very scalable and a longer term relationship kind of a business. This is especially important in today's climate because the competitive intensity within the market has increased significantly, and having a loyal customer base would probably be the most important competitive advantage within the market. So now that we have looked at all the 6 hypotheses, let's see, how does the conventional wisdom actually stack up against all of these, and see, what's the record of conventional wisdom. So our hypothesis 1, which was NTC customers are younger and hence less responsible. This hypothesis is, I would say, marginally true, but we have to keep in mind that all the customers are still not young. 6 out of 10 NTC customers actually had an age which was 30 or more. So lenders have to ensure that the marketing and product design strategies keep this age diversity into account. We should, when we are, let's say, targeting NTC customers, let's not have campaigns which are targeted purely at people who are aged, who are less than 30-year-old. Keep in mind that you're looking at a very broad cross section of the market. The second hypothesis was a consumer's first score is a subprime score. This is clearly false. We saw that roughly 82% of all NTC customers actually started off with a score of prime and above. Hypothesis 3, NTC customers have volatile scores, so you can't really trust the scores that they present. That is definitely true, but this is also counterbalanced by the fact that NTC customers tend to have a very high degree of positive migration, and they tend to show a lot of improvement over time, even when compared to credit established customers. Hypothesis 4 is NTC customers perform worse than credit established customers. Of course, at an aggregate level, this is true. But when you, let's say, divide the entire segment into prime and non-prime, in the prime range, we do not expect any performance difference between the new to credit and the credit established consumers. And considering the fact that 82% of all NTC customers have start off with a score of prime and above, it means that the performance is largely similar for bulk of the NTC customers. It's only in the non-prime ranges that you see delinquency being higher for the NTC customers, but over there also the scores definitely rank orders performance, and it can still give you some ideas about the relative risk. Hypothesis 5, NTC customers have unique credit needs. This is clearly false. As we clearly saw, as we saw, NTC customers' needs and credit established customers' needs are broadly similar, and they tend to buy more or less the same products and are probably focused more on the consumption lending on both sides. Hypothesis 6, which is, are NTC customers loyal also or not? And over there, this is completely true. We have seen that the probability that an NTC customer will open their second product with the lender who issued them the first product is actually higher than that for a credit established customer. So just to summarize the entire study, we are talking about NTC customers. They are a significant portion of the market. They still provide, close to a quarter of the entire loan amount within a particular period, close to a third of all consumers within the market. And when we, let's say, compare performance, between NTC and credit established, we find that there are significant behavioral and performance similarities between NTC and credit established customers, and they tend to be much more stable and attractive than what conventional wisdom would suggest. Last but certainly not the least, what I would say is our analysis of untapped customer clearly shows that there is significant white space available for this attractive area of growth. That's it from my side. Now I'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Yogendra, for that insightful presentation. And as you just said, we'll now open up the webinar for questions. We have a question for you, Yogendra. The participant wants to know, can you please elaborate on the key reasons behind the similarity between NTC and credit established populations?
Sure. So, the biggest reason why NTC and credit established in India will tend to be more similar than different is simply because we are still not a society which is, highly penetrated in terms of retail lending. So when you're looking at NTC, so from an age perspective, we saw that, NTC is spread across the age spectrum. If you look at it from a regional perspective, you will still find that NTC is spread across the regional spectrum also. So in a way, the samples from which the credit established and the NTC customers are coming are broadly similar. So that is the reason why they will tend to actually show pretty similar behavior. Now, if we move, if you fast forward to 20 years hence, back when, let's say, almost everybody in India has had access to retail lending, or for the matter, if you take the example of, let's say, the US, where NTC customers, tend to come largely from the younger age range. So over there, NTC customers would typically be in the age range of, let's say, 18 to 25, 18 to 26. In that case, the differences do become stark because of a demographic differentiation. But in India, because it's more or less similar, we are still talking about both the segments of the population behaving quite similarly.
Thank you, Yogendra. We have another question for you. Which are the products that have a significantly high proportion of NTC borrowers?
Sure. So consumer loans and two-wheeler loans are the two products where you would see a significant proportion of new to credit customers. In two-wheeler loans, even now, roughly, somewhere around, let's say, 60% of all originations actually come through the new to credit route. And in fact, in consumer durables, that ratio would be somewhere around 40%. But all in all, these two products actually put together would be contributing close to, I would say, 2/3 of all new to credit customers that are coming into the market.
Sure. Thank you, Yogendra. We have another question for you. What do you think is the geographical makeup of the NTC population?
So during the course of this presentation, we didn't really track the geography of the NTC population, but what I can see is, I would expect the NTC and the credit established to be more aligned than different in the geography as well. So when we think about NTC, our usual reaction of the conventional wisdom would be that most NTC customers would be coming in from, let's say, tier 3 or tier 4 towns compared to a metro. That it would be difficult to find new to credit population within a city like Mumbai, and you would probably expect them more in from any kind of a tier 3 or tier 4 city. I personally think that considering the low penetration that is there, proportionately, we might see lower NTC contribution of metros, but you would definitely still see material contribution coming in from all cities, big or small, in terms of NTC population.
Sure, Yogendra. The next question is, Is there a difference in the ways in which different market players approach the NTC opportunity?
Yes, of course. So, your ability to approach the NTC segment actually depends on the kind of products that you have on offer, as well as the geographic spread that you have. So, for example, NBFCs who are pretty active on both consumer durables and, let's say, two-wheelers, they tend to actually have a decent proportion of customers who are coming in the new to credit. They have developed their own ways and means of dealing with that kind of segment, and their ability to service that segment is then much better compared to other players who may not have access to these products. If you, let's say, take PSU banks, the advantage that they have is their wide geographical network. Their branch networks are spread all across India, so they are able to access customers in the tier 3 or tier 4 towns, where probably those customers don't have access to any other formal retail lending channel. So that way, depending on your geography or depending on your branch networks, depending on your product distribution, different players do tend to have differential ability to capitalize on this segment.
Thank you, Yogendra. The next question is: Can you? The gentleman wants you to elaborate further on the ways to score NTC customers. Can you throw more light on the way to score NTC customers, please?
So over here, the focus was not on the scoring aspect per se, but I mean, we are definitely, working on, scoring NTC customers using lookalike methods, and we have, a lot of, let's say, products which tend to, focus on that dimension. And I think that in time we'll be able to come up with more detailed, or probably have a separate webinar on that. Because this is something that would be interest to other people. But lookalikes are generally the best way to score NTC customers. Of course, that's from a bureau perspective. From a lender perspective, lenders do have certain advantages, that they get income documentation, they get a lot more other data than a typical bureau. So their ability to score an NTC customer is actually, from other different perspectives, is always there. And thirdly, what I'm thinking is, the industry probably has to start thinking about leveraging alternative data in trying to score NTC customers. And there are, let's say, there are different avenues of research available, especially by, let's say, utilizing machine learning algorithms in trying to understand, both from a psychometric or a psychological profile, as well as from hard data perspective, what are the various ways in which you could score NTC customers.
Sure. The next question is: business loan were not part of analysis. How do you see performance of business loans for NTC customers?
To be honest, I've not really looked at it. So this is an answer for which, I mean, this is a question for which I won't have the data as of now.
Sure, Yogendra. The next question is: from a ticket size perspective, how are NTC customers different from established customers?
So, as we clearly saw, we were talking about, NTC customers have typically, let's say, 1/3 of all customers, but they get just a 1/4 of all loans. So clearly, it's very pretty much, it's fixed that NTC customers tend to have a ticket size which is, let's say, 75 to 80% of the average of the market. Now, the way I see it is driven both from a supply and a demand perspective, or both from a push and a pull factor. So if you look at it from a lender perspective, risk is also a function of what we don't know. If we don't know something, or if we feel uncertain about something, we tend to perceive that as higher risk. Now, NewtoCredit, by virtue of the fact that there is very little performance history available for them, they have very little data surrounding them. So the uncertainty increases. So perceptions regarding risk increase, because of which lenders will probably try to give them slightly lower loans. But look at it from a demand perspective also now. If I'm taking a loan for the first time, chances are probably my needs are lesser than somebody who has been actually using that product for quite some years now. So both from a push and a pull perspective, you would find, I mean, these two factors in conjunction produce a climate in which NTC average ticket sizes tend to be at a discount to the average ticket size.
Sure, Yogendra. We have time for one more question before we wrap up the session. The last question for you, Yogendra, is do younger NTC get better score over time as compared to older NTC?
Well, to be really honest, I've not really looked at it from that perspective, but I would suggest that I mean, when we looked at, let's say, the score migration, those tended to be positive all across. And over here, it's very difficult to say whether it is younger or older because you will have to take into account the product that they're taking, the leverage that they're building out, and there are multiple other factors which may decide these.
Sure, Yogendra. That's all we have time for participants. With this, we bring this webinar to a close. Participants, we hope that today's session was valuable to you and it will help you in taking crucial decisions with respect to NTC customers. Thank you once again, Yogendra, and thank you participants for taking out time for this session. Have a great evening ahead.
Thanks a lot.